First of all, we have Phil Holden talking about integrating climate change and nature recovery responses. Phil Holden has been the manager for 16 years with the Shropshire Hills AONB Partnership, which works to conserve and enhance the national landscape of the Shropshire Hills area of outstanding natural beauty, covering most of the Ludlow constituency. Phil is a geographer by training and previously worked in Scotland and Northumberland.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It's in relation to land that climate change interacts most with other environmental challenges. The donut economics model described earlier sets out this safe space for humanity where human needs are met within these 9 connected ecological boundaries, but at least 4 of these are being breached. The visual image here, where the concept of good meaning in balance rather than the usual graphs of good meaning forwards and upwards, is really helpful in the mindset shift we need, and I really recommend the resources linked to this. Emissions from land and land use account for a higher proportion of greenhouse gases in rural areas like ours. So land is part of the problem, but through its potential for carbon sequestration, it's also part of the solution. But the capacity for sequestration is probably way less than the demand for offsetting. So nature-based solutions are absolutely not an easy cop-out from the really cutting emissions hard in other areas. These then are the actions relating to land set out by the Committee on Climate Change: low carbon farming, increased tree cover, restoring peatlands and more bioenergy, along with reducing red meat and dairy consumption and reducing food waste. Other blueprints have varying versions of this, but much in common. This plan does talk about co-benefits for ecology and nature from these actions, but they aren't fully integrated in the policy. Nature decline isn't just a problem of somewhere else, it's also happening in our beautiful Shropshire Hills. Like elsewhere, we risk losing rare species, but we're also losing the abundance of common plants and animals. And we have pressures on water and soils, the ecological functioning of life systems as well as species. There's lots of excellent action by many people and organisations, and there are some positive trends in the area, but overall, as with climate, we're not doing nearly enough. As the AONB Partnership, we don't own any land. We work in partnership on targeted projects with landowners and community groups. We've done a lot of river catchment work, and here's some wetland and river corridor restoration projects. We work with farmers, including currently on a test and trial for the new environmental land management scheme, and we work on sustainable tourism and on awareness and engagement, including with young people. As a small organisation with a statutory basis, quite a bit of our work is through influencing, sharing ideas and knowledge, and bringing partners together. We're working on a plan for nature recovery, and I'd like to run through some of the principles behind this, starting with why it needs to be integrated with responses to climate change. So looking at land just from a one-dimensional perspective of carbon emissions overlooks nature and risks doing harm by mistake. So a simplistic view, say that all livestock are evil and land should be either growing human food or trees, wouldn't necessarily be good for nature and ecology, because cultivating on steep slopes is a problem for soils and water, and nature needs variety. Our best heathland nature areas need some grazing, and peatlands can actually store more carbon than woods. Food production is a vital service that we need from land, and the national models set out in sustainable intensification to raise food yields in some places in order that more emphasis can be given to nature and carbon sequestration elsewhere. So staying exactly as we are with our land, or with the trends we currently have in it, won't achieve net zero or nature recovery, and isn't really an option. Our land will need to look different, but it isn't a blank sheet, and we need to retain what's there that helps and grow it from there. Because multiple uses or values of land actually overlay in the same place. Rather than thinking just in terms of arable land, pasture, woodland, and so on, it helps to think about the range of benefits or ecosystem services that come from all land, and how that balance can be the optimum for that place. Food production is really important in this mix and may be present even on a top quality nature site like the Long Mynd here, which needs some grazing by livestock. But just seeking to maximise food production may well be at the expense of other benefits and may not give the best benefit overall from land. However, farms are businesses, and where a direct market doesn't exist for public goods, the mechanisms to pay farmers to deliver them are needed. A couple more points about models for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from land and whether they take account of nature. More intensive livestock systems, such as cattle housed indoors, are often described as better in terms of direct emissions from the stock, but this usually doesn't take into account other environmental factors such as inputs, soil, water and nature, for which other systems are better, as Mark and James will be talking about later. Also, some of the models for net zero farming seem to rely too heavily on energy crops, and this obviously puts pressure on land and probably won't leave enough space left for nature. So what does land use for nature recovery look like? Here are some of the principles of what's needed, and importantly, this needs a dialogue with land managers. We're working on what this means for the Shropshire Hills, but nobody knows exactly how this fits in practice with maintaining rural businesses and livelihoods, and we have to work that out together. Here is the essence of nature recovery networks. Nature can't survive in isolated reserves. They aren't big enough and they aren't connected enough. And high quality habitats of these core sites can in some cases be expanded and buffered and linked across the landscape with corridors and smaller patches of good habitat and newly created or restored sites. In the Shropshire Hills, the core sites are places like the Long Mynd, Stiperstones, Wenlock Edge, along with the best woods, rivers, wetlands and species-rich grasslands. And it's worth remembering that many of these sites do need active management of the right kind, not just to be left alone. So breaking this down to half a dozen priorities for our landscape, making the margins of heath and rough grassland softer will improve the really important edge or transition habitats, including scrub. Existing woodlands can be expanded and regenerated, which may well mean excluding stock or controlling deer. We need to renaturalise our rivers, enhancing river corridors with tree and shrub cover, again often with control of stock access, and restoring floodplain wetlands. Improving our rivers needs to start at the very top, roughening hilltops with more complex vegetation and re-wetting land, especially peatlands in the headwaters. Peatlands can store more carbon than woods, but if they aren't wet and in good condition, peatlands actually emit carbon. Ours are mostly shallow, usually drained, and often highly modified by farming and forestry. Re-wetting and roughening our catchment headwaters will also hold back water to slow the flow in our rivers. This won't stop flooding altogether, but delaying a flood peak can lower it, like in the red curve here. We need to expand tree cover in nature-friendly ways, mimicking the natural patterns and using lots of native species. This means the steep banks, upland gullies and streams, field corners, and trees outside woods, including hedges and hedgerow trees and agroforestry. Losses from tree diseases will mean we have to work even harder on establishing new trees. We need to farm to maximise the whole range of benefits to society, finding the right balance of land use for each place. Pasture and arable regimes which increase soil organic content and minimise compaction, which reduce water and nutrient runoff and soil loss into rivers. Finally, nature and climate recovery needs people to be interested in and to value nature. It isn't a coincidence that many of the behavioural changes which would help lower carbon emissions, such as more active travel through walking, cycling and so on, also have huge health and well-being benefits to individuals. And people's emotional connection to nature is a big factor in how they will adapt their behaviour for the environment. This doesn't have to be just about making sacrifices for the environment. It can actually be about choosing a better life. So against this last slide of a range of species, each of which has particular needs which show how the Shropshire Hills landscape needs to change for nature recovery, I'll finish with what we would like to do in the future. There's so much more to do to nurture our nature recovery network in rivers and catchments, peat and wetlands, trees and woods, building soil carbon, and engaging the broadest range of people to develop our understanding together. And what's needed to enable us to achieve that? Well, yes, more funding from government and many other sources for all the different organisations and people who can help to do the work needed. But not just money, we need more purpose, collaboration, sharing of knowledge, demonstration projects and support networks. We aren't all going to agree on everything, but where we need to challenge or disagree, we need compassion as people and to hang on to positivity in working together and working it out together.
Thank you very much, Phil. We have some limited time for questions, so if you have questions for Phil, can you please put them in chat initially? But can I invite Ron Repath to unmute and ask a question that he's posted in the...
Yeah. Hi, Phil. I'm not sure whether this be appropriate for your or one of the other speakers, but I'm just wondering how we can build up bulk humus back in the denuded soils of farms. There are so few bulk manures available now, and I see it as a real problem. Chicken muck and human muck just doesn't stay in the ground for very long. Thank you.
Probably would defer to the other speakers slightly on this one, Ron, but you're absolutely right that the sort of mobility of nutrients from manures is a key issue, and certainly in relation to poultry waste. So that whole kind of manure management planning thing is very key to limiting nutrient runoff. As regards the actual sources for it, I mean, I guess this takes us into the sort of debates about the place of livestock in our landscape, which, you know, as Nick was saying this morning, there's many dimensions to that, but the use of manure is one of those.
Thank you.